What was your branch of service?
U.S. Coast Guard.
What was your highest rank?
E3, Seaman Gunner's Mate. Or actually, SNGM, whatever that's a connotation.
In what general locations did you serve?
This is long. I volunteered to go. I enlisted in the Coast Guard. I was stationed in Boston, and then I found out that there was a good crew getting ready, preparing to go for a good tour to Vietnam. So Chief Browning, who was my gunner's mate boss, said to me they had an opening, and I wouldn't get much rank, but I would get to see a lot more than a different facet of the Coast Guard, the United States Coast Guard. So anyway, we went north on an Ocean Station Bravo in February, and we saw icebergs. But my point was I wanted to do it. The chief didn't even go because it's so rough. But I wanted to do it because what's the sense if I can't do something in North Atlantic? What good am I going to be in Vietnam? So anyway, went up there, did ocean stations off the coast of Argentia, Newfoundland, and Canada, and then down. What we would do is at night, we would keep in contact with planes flying from Logan to Europe to Spain, and then we did oceanography things. We dropped vials of water 1,500 feet into the water, take water tests for our oceanography, an international, our government science project. And we also, we had a grid to follow. If there was any fishing vessels out there which were in trouble. And one night we were drifting with a iceberg, and it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. I was on watch, and all of a sudden, this is a very small cutter. It's only 378 feet long. We were drifting on a grid, and what happened during the night, the flow changed, and we were drifting closer and closer to the Coast Guard. So I yelled, and we turned it hard, because the thing about an iceberg is whatever you see above the water, underneath could be 3 to 5 to 7 times larger than what's above it. So we got away from it. But during the night, somehow or another, it changed course. And we had to, we also fired a 5-inch 38 gun into it, which is always a pointer in a 5-inch 38. The projectile is 56 pounds, the powder case is 34, just to get some firing practice. Then we got done with that, went back to Boston, and it was so rough, the hull was torn from the superstructure about 1 inch. We had to go in and get the whole hull welded, because we had a light alloy hull. The superstructure was steel. And also while we were out there, we saw Russian fishing boats and Russian trawlers off our coast. Went to the Boston. Then from there, I did one more ocean station. It was different. Coast Guard is responsible from the Canadian border all the way down to Fire Island. That's Coast Guard District 1, which we were a part of. And came back down, and then they had a gunfire training in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. So went to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. We did gunfire training there, and we trained off the coast of Puerto Rico. There's a firing range. We fired there. We did really well, and we also had to do abandoned ship drills. We had to do fire safety drills if there was a fire on board, stuff like that. We passed all those tests, and we're very accurate. I was in charge of, you had different little jobs, and I was in charge of when the ammunition was stowed below. Even though I didn't have the rank, the chief put me in charge, because once I stowed it, it was stowed properly. Because when you have heavy weather, if these projectiles start bouncing around, the firing thing isn't set yet, but it's not a good thing. You don't want them bouncing around. The powder cases is not bad. It's only 35 pounds, but the projectiles are 56 pounds, and had to make sure they were stowed. So but we did very good. We're very accurate. And we did a tour down there. We went to, for R&R, we went to Puerto Rico and Jamaica during that Guantanamo Bay training. Spent time in Guantanamo Bay, 30 days, and from there we went back to Boston. We got in the yards, and then from there we came back from Boston, went down to the Rodman Naval Base, and we went through the Panama Canal, which takes 8 hours. Went through the Panama Canal. On the other side, we went up to Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor was a beautiful base. It's the most beautiful base in the world. We were there for, I think, 2 to 3 weeks, more training. And once we got to the Philippines, before we went to Vietnam, we were under the Navy and the Marine Corps. And that's who called our firing. So, but we were accurate, very accurate in our firing. So anyway, we left there. We went to, like I said, Pearl Harbor was beautiful. And then we left there and we went to Subic Bay in the Philippines, which is at that time, a huge naval and air force. It was a city. Every day there was 3,000, 4,000 Filipino people that came to work there. Now, once we left there, we reported to the Navy and the Marine Corps. What our job was, market time, we would go up and down the coast of Vietnam, and if we would refuel the riverboats, we were on the riverboats, and we went to different sectors. We would be out for 35, 40 days, and then we go in. We went to Hong Kong. The first time I was there for a week. The second time for two weeks. While we're in Vietnam, we also had to. We went on. I'm not sure it was Vung Tau, An Toi, or where it was. We were in Da Nang Harbor. I know we were there, but we're at one place we got called in, and the VC blew up a children's hospital for propaganda reasons. And a lot of the Vietnamese in some of these poorer areas, when a child was sick or wounded, they'd take them up that hill to die. Like, and the Americans, New Zealanders volunteered, and British, and they had this hospital. So we went back the next day. It was muddy and all terrible, and we tried to set it up and get it cleaned up so these kids could come back. Because, like I said, they blew it up. Well, anyway, they were coming out the next night, and at night we didn't have these white lights. We had red lights so they couldn't spot us. So I was the pointer on a 5-inch 38. So they called us in, and we're firing one short, one long. But we also knew from the scuttlebutt from some of the Army in-country guys that they would turn around and they'd run in a tunnel when they did their business, and they wouldn't face anybody. But the problem is, this tunnel went under a Michelin tire plantation. And because Michelin Tire was owned by stockholders in the United States, they didn't want it blown up. Well, anyway, I was on board, and I said to the other person in the mount, there was 2 of us in the mount, and also the hot shell man and the chief brownie. And when I was in there, even though I didn't have a high rate, so anyways, we knew they were heading back to this tunnel. And that night we got 38 KIAs. We also did some damage to the plantation, which we got in trouble for. And they asked me, what's wrong with your headphones? I said, I couldn't hear the command to cease fire. I was on manual, and I kept pulling it, and we kept firing. But anyway, we left there. We're going to go back into, I believe it was Hong Kong. And before we went in, because the Coast Guard is all life-saving, and there was photographers there, I had to go out with a grinder and grind off the KIAs off the mount. But what upset us the most was because of propaganda purposes, they were using kids that were sick and injured as pawns, and they were just doing this to scare the population of the people, which they had been doing great, because they knew our system as good as we knew theirs, or better. We were on a river, and I was in a helicopter, and we flew down, and it was a gunfire, and the helicopters, the best helicopters in the world are the Sikorskis. The Bell helicopters are terrible. The Grummins are terrible. When you're riding them, you got your gun on the side, and it doesn't firm. It's not firm. It's not put together properly. A Coast Guard helicopter with a machine gun mounted, you had no problems. You could do what you had to do. Got out of a helicopter, an Army helicopter, touched down on our flight deck, which was a very small flight deck. The helicopter went up, and they blew it out of the sky. So God was with me. I was very lucky. We left there, went back. We also were in Japan, and we're in Yokosuka, Yokohama. And this is over, we spent a year over there. Then they woke us up one morning, and they said that we have to go to, you guys are the guinea pigs. You've got to go to Cambodia. It's uncharted waters, and you've got to go first, because President Johnson didn't want the most sophisticated guided missile cruiser in the world, the USS Turner Joy, getting damaged. So we went ahead of the USS Turner Joy. We're in Cambodia. And we went up, we did what we had to do. They called upon us to fire. Even though we're a small cutter, the reason they used us as much as they did was because sometimes when they needed you for a firefight, we could get into a smaller, tighter area, and we were very accurate, which was a good thing. The Air Force sometimes, and again, at night, you had no white lights. You had all red lights so nobody could see from a distance. At night, there was one firefight where the rounds were coming at us, and it was our own people. And there was radio silence. And whether I should have or I shouldn't have, I yelled. I said, "You idiots, you're firing at the wrong target. It's us." And then I was in trouble for that, but you always know where they're coming in. You just knew the sound and the ammunition. So that ceased that night, but they were way off. It's friendly fire is terrible, but then basically we did a lot of that. We refueled riverboats, and I had a friend on a riverboat, a Coast Guard riverboat. And when I first went there, he taught me a lot. He had done 2 or 3 tours there. His name was Richard. And Richard Howe, had a dog. And he said, this dog kept me alive. Because in Vietnam, they eat dog. And this dog could, in the middle of the night, if somebody was coming around the riverboat when they were trying to rest before they went back up the river, this dog would bark and wake them up. He'd just growl ferociously. And Richard says to me, when I go home, I've already applied and the government doesn't want to let me bring my dog home. But he said, I'm going to bring my dog with me. He said, one way or the other. And I lost touch with him because there's so many thousand Americans to give you an idea of our power we had in certain areas. I got up one morning and I looked up, I couldn't see the sky. There are aircraft carriers which are as big as some of the buildings in Manhattan. And there was 2 of them. And we were like stuck in here. I couldn't see the sun. I mean, the United States has some of the most sophisticated equipment in the world. It's just hard to believe. But anyway, we went there and we left. We went back to I was in Manila. I was in Subic. I was in Subic 11 times. I was in Manila 4 times. I was in, as I say, Bangkok. Went up the river to Bangkok, came back out of the river in Bangkok, hit most of the ports over there. In the Coast Guard, a lot of Army people were drafted and Marines were drafted. They just went to one place and had one R&R, whereas every 35, 40 days, we had powdered eggs, powdered milk all week long. We would get into like an area where you would have milk and vegetables and meats and stuff like this, where we were out online. They called it market time. And that was our job. We did it. And basically we came back through the Panama Canal. Well, first we went to San Francisco. And the city of San Francisco was fantastic. They had the fireboats come out and give us a show. And they put a big sign up and they shut off salutes for us. They said, welcome home, which we hadn't gotten any place. And we never did. But we went in there and I went by Alcatraz and we had, like, again, one of my other jobs was fender detail. And I had seen movies where Alcatraz, people said they escaped there and they said the current was strong. I never realized how powerful the current was in San Francisco Bay by Alcatraz. So as we're coming in to tie up onto a metal pier, I had 4 fenders and we're going to tie up on my side. And the fenders were like 6 feet high, 4 feet wide, and you had a block and tackle. You lower the motor side, so when you cruised up against it wouldn't hurt the hull of the Hamilton. And as we did, all of a sudden, because we did have bow thrusters, they knew the sounds of the engines and all and how it would go. But this picked us up in the air, and next to me, it took the first one, which is 6 feet high and about 4 feet wide, and just cut it like it was a toothpick. And the guy, and I screamed at him, and he yelled, and it went back, The block and tackle almost hit him in the head, but he got out of there and split three. We had the current alone in San Francisco Harbor put a huge gouge in our hull all the way down the side, and that was one of the things that happened. But basically, we had a lot of training in search and rescue. We would help fishermen. While we were in Vietnam, we mounted fishing vessels which weren't safe. We took them to shore. We had orphan kids. We brought them on board, gave them food. We had a small band. They played. The sisters, there was different religious groups which volunteered in Vietnam to help these kids who were orphans and played music for these kids. They got to talk a little bit to Americans and all. And we also did search and rescue, and we also chased trawlers out of that were coming in with more food and support and munitions for and basically that's what our job was. And then I came back, and then that was it. But the Coast Guard was some of the best for being a Coast Guard. And for years after, you went to a Marine club or an Army club or something, and right away they'd start, I don't want to get to that, but they'd start, Coast Guard, you guys can't go in 2 feet of water. But anyway, the U.S. Coast Guard has got a lot of very, very skilled and trained people. And it was a good tour. And that's basically it.
Thank you. Were you drafted or did you enlist?
Enlisted. I volunteered to go to Vietnam.
Where were you living at the time?
Seymour, Connecticut.
Do you remember the date?
Yes, April. I went in April 17, 1967. I got out April 17, 1971. I was called up in my reserve time to go to Pennsylvania, but I was injured on a job and I couldn't go.
Why did you join?
The reason I joined was I was going to school and I was working in Bridgeport, Connecticut for the Connecticut National Bank. And I was a bonded messenger. And at that time, I had friends. I got to go one step. I forgot something else. Prior to me enlisting in the United States Coast Guard, when I was in 1961, I got involved with the Explorer Scouts, who were sponsored by the David S. Miles American Legion Post in Oxford, Connecticut. I was one of the original 7 members, and we started a drum corps for parades, for Veterans Day events, and for firemen's conventions. And this group grew to be 70 members. We carried the flag of every church and synagogue and the American flag. What it was prior to me enlisting, my family, a lot of families believed in the United States is the greatest country in the world, and for I don't know how many years prior to me going in 67, I marched with the Explorers, Oxford Explorers Drum and Bugle Corps, and we would go to Veterans Day parades, Memorial Day parades, July 4th. We used to go up to Southbury Training School, and for the people up there in the afternoon, we play songs for them, and you taught everybody a little bit of military bearing. It wasn't like belonging to the Young Marines, but the Scouts, I also attended the first National Scout Conference in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and at the University of Michigan. But the group that I was with, I was very proud because these people, none of us were paid. We volunteered, we were Scouts, and a lot of people were happy because a lot of times we played taps at funerals and wakes. We would go to parades. A lot of times they'd have meals afterwards. But anyway, alluding to that, because of my training with this group and all, and then I had a friend I went to school with, and they named the field after him in Seymour. The John DeBarber Field was a classmate of mine. He did 2.5 tours in Vietnam, and he was a classmate of mine, John DeBarber. He was U.S. Army, and he went to Seymour High School with him. And I had other friends that, it was something that I decided that when I enlisted in the Coast Guard, I want to do it because they believed in search and rescue. They believed in, because it's so small, there's more of a comradeship. And one person, whether you get along with somebody or you don't, when your life depended upon it, it was imperative you reacted, and you all had jobs. One other thing I didn't tell you was that in the North Atlantic, while we're on Ocean Station, we got a helicopter come in, and I was in charge of helicopter tie-down crew. Now, it was so rough that you had to tie the helicopter on a small landing pad because it would slide off. So on the side, there was rails, and there was nets in the middle. And a guy next to me, his name was Goulet, he was told what to do, and he didn't quite hear it. He stepped in a net, and he dropped into 17-degree water. Well, we got him out. We saved him. He had a little bit of, from the cold, he had the, what do you call it? But they said I screamed so loud that the two guys and the corpsman, that was another thing about the Coast Guard. There was a lot of career people, and they were very, the corpsman there was young, and he stitched me up a couple times. But we got him out, and the other two guys, they never stopped teasing me. One other thing I forgot to mention during this was that we were firing one day on and off for about 18 hours. And the ammunition hoist broke from the lower landing loading room upstairs, up top, where I was in a mount. So they're handing up, powder cases were all lined up here. We had stacks of them. We're firing. And the projectiles were coming up in a hoist. Now, when the hoist broke, they had to lift it manually. I was in a lot better shape those days. But anyway, I said to the chief, and I said, listen, I said, can you put somebody just to sit and put this on automatic, we had an automatic with a computer, which would take into the consideration the waves, and that's how we hit our target. But the computer wasn't what did it. We had to get in close enough to see, to do our firing. But anyway, I went down below. I'm lifting up the 56-pound projectile for about an hour or so, and a fella on a deck above me dropped the 56-pound projectile off from the top up there, the next deck down off my head and my back. Now, the government lost my record. St. Louis burned. They lost my records for 41 years. But finally now the government was good enough to give me my full credit for that. I went to sick bay, and Young, who was a Korean vet and a Vietnam vet. The Coast Guard has a lot of people who had been in the service for a while, and a lot of them came back in. But they were very skilled. He stitched me up, and he said, I got good news and bad news. I said, what's the good news? He said, well, he says, they're taking the chief's quarters, going to give you a drink, and you got to go back up. So he stitched me up, because the XO and the captain needed me back up there. So I went back up. And as we swung around, we're coming to the end of our mission there. One other thing that happened was we were firing another instance for a certain amount of hours. I forgot how many. And one of the rounds got locked in the chamber. I had a hot gun. You could have fried eggs on it. And I was scared. Everybody took off. And I was on my way to take off. And the heat would send one of these off. Well, anyways, there's rifling. There's rifling, and it goes all the way out. And evidently it was a burr. My chief explained to me. So my chief comes up behind me. He says, where the hell do you think you're going? I says, I'm getting out of here to the safest spot. He says, you're surrounded by a 1/4 inch of steel. In the front, you're surrounded by 1 inch of steel. If the thing does blow, he was very skilled, the chief. He'd done this for years. It's going to bend the gun, but it's not going to hurt you. Those guys that ran off up on looking from where the XO is and everybody up there, they're the ones that are going to get blown up. He says, that's why I got you. I said, what does that mean? There was a huge rubber mallet. He said, I want you to hit that round. I said, Chief, I got a hot gun. I got a burr in the chamber. You want me to hit that with that mallet? He called my last name. He says, I wouldn't do this if I was going to hurt you. I know when you get done, you'll remember this the rest of your life, which I almost forgot. He says, you hit this with this mallet. Well, hit it once, hit it twice. Now I'm sweating. It finally freed. He said to me, hit the manual thing, which you normally do, which I did. I hit the manual key and went right off it. But what it was this round was made Waterbury. And he never let me forget that. He said, "That's right where you live." He goes, "That round was made in water by one of your factories." What it was there was a burr a small burr, but the round itself wasn't perfect, and there was a few imperfections in the rounds. But anyway, it exploded. But we could have. That was a very scary. I mean, it was sweating bullets. You could have fried. They actually took an egg up one time. They fried it on the gun. That's how hot our gun got. But anyway, and that's the Coast Guard. But people, they look at you like. But that's a few of the things. I just can't remember anything else right now.
What can you tell me about your boot camp and training experiences?
Boot camp. Most of our DIs were ex-Marines. And again, the Coast Guard seemed to be a place where if you had problems or something, they would take you in. Like a lot of guys who put time in, couldn't get work on the outside, they'd bring you in. They had things have changed now, but if you were in your 30s, you couldn't get work, you could go in there and they defined a spot for you. And the Coast Guard at that time was very, very small. It's all changed now because I had my Coast Guard hat on up in Canada. The guy came up from Homeland Security, had a big talk to me. And I've talked to different people. Things have changed a lot, but we had a very, they taught you to rely on one another, but to do your job. And in the Coast Guard, you had different responsibilities. Every day, not just standing watches, but when you're on a deck force I had to go on a deck force 30 days before legally I could go in to be a gunner's mate. And I did my 30 days in the North Atlantic, which was tough. But my second tour, I was on the gunner's mate. But anyway, you have a job to do. And one life-saving, everybody depends upon one another. So if someone else is injured, you've got to pull them out in a seat and try to get in, even in a helicopter, get in there and do his job.
So, did you see combat while you were stationed?
Yes.
Were there casualties in your unit?
Not our unit. And 3 or 4 of the areas we're in, we saw casualties either just ahead of us, we're very lucky, or just behind us on some of the river inlets we were on. And in a lot of places are very secure, like Vung Tau, Antoy, all these different places. Da Nang is like a secure area other than like a terrorist bombing or something. But our group, no. We get into the small boat one day, and we had the M16, and I told this young ensign, Ensign Kiley, Bernice met him, he's still alive, a couple of the ensigns have passed on. I said, just be careful, because with the round in the chamber, we always had the round in the chamber. You hit by mistake, and the round could go off. And one of the things that scared me also was we're getting in the small boat, Ensign Kiley touches the M16 down, and the round went through the chamber and went straight right up by me. We got into we boarded a fishing vessel, supposedly, and as we're going through the fishing vessel, we discovered box munitions, and which we took and destroyed. And while you're working, you had to be sure that the guy that was watching over you with the weapon was watching your back, so to speak. So you had the people on board, and you had someone that you could trust watching your back. I'm not a marksman, but as far as on a 5-inch .38, we were excellent as far as targets with huge projectiles and smaller powder cases. But on a 2.23 to 5.56, the shotgun, the 45 caliber, our small arms weapons, when I put that round in, I would burn up 2 cases of ammunition. Like on an M60, I burned 2 barrels. But on a 50 caliber, which is an old World War II weapon, the shells are about that long and about that thick, and they're very powerful. But those there, I don't know how John Wayne ever carried them around in the movies. You'd have to have it on a tripod or on a stand because they're too. But the old 50 caliber, which the Coast Guard still has, well, they did have in 70s, 69, 70, was a very powerful weapon. But as far as that, they knew that when I was watching them, when I was watching over my shipmates, there wouldn't be too much could hurt them.
Were you ever taken prisoner during any conflict?
No, we had a drill. We had our dog tags, and if we did get blown up, all we had to do, because of the Geneva Convention, was give our name, rank, and serial number. We were schooled on that because of where we were.
Were you awarded any medals or citations?
The Vietnam, it's a meritorious thing. That's the only thing, and it wasn't because of being wounded. I was not wounded because of our work over there.
Right. Did you sustain any injuries?
My neck and my back, and then the ship took a roll one day. As a matter of fact, I was grinding off the KIAs, and the grinder cut my leg, but nothing big. And then that's about it. Other than ammunition unreps, and you get nicks and everything, loading and unloading. What we have to do is there's a wall this high, and there's metal racks. And as you load 3 or 4 in this way, you flip it over and you load 3 or 4, you drop in a metal bar. So I would have on heavy leather gloves, not heavy, but so I could move. My boondockers, my steel-toed shoes, shorts because you'd be soaking wet from loading and unloading these things, and my hat, and you load them up, but you had to make sure that every one of these was locked in. And once it was locked in, a lot of times, nothing big, you bumped your hand or whatever you did. It wasn't that bad. But when we had the unreps, where another ship would come alongside you, a U.S. Navy ship, which would be huge. It'd be a fueler. And one day, they'd shoot a line across, pull the line, and you'd pull across this hose. The hose would be that big. And you'd be getting your JP5, your jet fuel, from that. And what happened was, one day we're just about done, and something happened, and there was a guy there, and I saw it, and the thing let go. And when it let go, this thing, because when you're getting a fuel on rep, you're both moving through the water. It's as you're underway. And as it let go, I yelled at this guy, I screamed at him, and the tail end of metal part, which connects to our ship, let loose, and it flew through the air. It almost took his head off, but he was all right. But again, he was glad that I was. But like I said, I was a lot better shape than you were trained to make sure that this went. You weren't in charge, but you had to make sure your shipmates weren't hurt, and that's basically it. It's in what they call a fuel unrep and ammo unrep. Now the helicopters would come in, and they'd drop bags, and the Pacific was fairly calm. We didn't hit too many big storms at all, and we saw a typhoon. But when the ammo unrep came in, you had to be organized enough to get the ammunition on to a line of guys, go down 3 decks to have it stowed below. So it's a work in progress. There's always something to do, but when you're getting ready to fire.
I've got some questions about what life was like there, just living conditions. How do you stay in touch with your family?
Oh yeah.
Like, how do you do that?
With my family?
Yeah.
On the telephone. Last night she had supper at Bernice's house.
No. I mean, like, life while you were like in the Coast Guard, like.
Mail. Mail was very important. We'd get it every so often. They'd have to catch up with us. It would be to an APO post office box, and the mail would catch up. And I had a grandmother who used to send me a letter like once a week. I had a brother who used to write me, and different people wrote you. But it meant a lot, because when you're 1,000 miles away, like people talk about hours in the air, but when you're 35 days away from home, and it's Christmas or New Year's or a birthday or holiday, again, having a tight crew in the Coast Guard, the guys all, you'd get together, you'd have your coffee in the evening or something like this, and other than your job, you'd wait for when you were called up, because at market time, we could be called anytime to go into whatever was going on. And a lot of times, we'd hear, like I said, a couple of people on riverboats smartened us up on how to conduct ourselves. But a lot of these people, they went through the Dateline initiation, and I went through the Equator initiation. So when I went to Vietnam, my head had been shaved. I had a brownish red beard and brownish red hair on my chest. And the people over there were taught for generations, the Vietnamese, that people have hair in their face like us, which they don't have, hair in their chest like that, us, which they don't have, are barbarians. And you can't change that fixation. Even you talk to them, a lot of them don't understand English. But they're very smart, very smart. The ones that, they're very quick and very smart. But they still treated us like barbarians. And again, during even Vietnam, propaganda entered into a lot of this. And one of our big letdowns was the fact that Jane Fonda went to Hanoi that time. We're very let down with that. It hurt a lot of Americans' feelings that she went when there was POWs in prison camps being tortured, and she went over there to North Vietnam, to Hanoi. And now they're trying to rewrite history like it didn't matter, it didn't happen. Benedict Arnold did something like that, and he was convicted of treason. He lived out his life in England, but because of her connections, she's gotten away with it. And I was in this very room. I was called up by some fellows from the VFW Post 201 in Baldwin Street when he had a professor here from Holy Cross University. And he wrote a book. And Governor Russo, whose wife was still alive from Waterbury, her husband, when he was alive, was interviewed over what went on with Jane Fonda and what happened when they were filming that movie in Waterbury. And I listened to this gentleman talk for an hour. Then I got up and started talking. 3 young people from Holy Cross in this very room said, "Sir, we didn't come to hear you. We came to hear him." I said, "Well, first of all, there's a few inaccuracies here, and I just want to square them away." And someone else said, "He was in Vietnam. He's not talking off his hip. He's been here. He deserves it. Let him talk." There was a Waterbury policeman in here. It got a little bit heated. But what happened was propaganda is a terrible thing. And in any war, and you can't always believe what's being told to you. But again, like I said, we had Coast Guard being a tight outfit. People would see you hadn't seen in 2 or 3 years, and they would tell you what's going on and everything. But getting back to this particular incident, when we were over there, that was a huge letdown that because she went to Hanoi, you could have a viewpoint, because even before I went to Vietnam, there was rallies in Hopkinton, Mass., in Wakefield, Mass., all anti-war rallies from Harvard. I just missed John Wayne coming to Harvard Square in Boston when he rode down when they're having a big anti-American war. You could have that here, but to go to an enemy's camp and stay there while we had people being tortured, it's hard for me to fathom. John Wayne rode on a tank at the Harvard Square with 50,000 students protesting a war. They did it, they protested, they had their right to say that, these students, and that's not a problem. There is, I'm not a war advocate, anything like that. Wakefield, Mass., a lot of rallies. Sometimes when I was stationed in Boston before I went to Vietnam, I would take the train home, but I learned right away, don't wear your uniform because people throw stuff at you. You're a warmonger, you're a child killer. We were not, the Coast Guard was none of the above. So you wear civilian clothes going home and civilian clothes coming back because people would just, and you don't want to get, you don't want to wait, you want to wait to see your family. You don't want to waste your time with somebody who's just getting into something which you have no control over. And again, this country does a lot of great things, but this thing with her was, and again, they're trying to rewrite history where it didn't happen. And but it's sad.
Did you feel pressure or stress?
Sometimes you'd like going back to you see these little children and Americans, New Zealanders, Australians taking care of them, and then people of their own kind going in there and hurting kids. It's a sad. It's a very, in other words, you'd be stressed out about that. How could they do this? These kids, and a lot of these Vietnamese people, they would just take them up on a hill to die.
How did you handle it?
You had your work, and we chatted like we're chatting now, talked about it, and you got to, you try to put it in its proper perspective, because you weren't really controlling it, and there's nothing you can control, but you try to do the right thing. But some of these people, they didn't respect you anyway. And it would be like we had an engineering officer, Lieutenant Commander McDougal. He was in World War II as a young man, and this was his last tour. And in the Coast Guard, as a matter of fact, he was an emergent Marine. And he said, you cannot, he says, in 10 or 12 years, when our way of life becomes their style of life, then they're going to be more receptive and understand us. But it's like going into a land where they don't have no clue about what we're doing. Especially today, the ages have changed again with CNN and everything else. But those days, there was no clue. The only thing they had over there in Vietnam that we saw a lot of was Coca-Cola. There'd be drugs over there if you wanted them. There was different things, like you were told not to fool around with any of the girls over there. You'd come down. We had some guys. They come down with some kind of. He had some type of intercourse with a girl who was infected, and he didn't do it against her will or nothing. But in 6-7 hours, he was rolling on a flight deck in pain. They had to fly him to an army base, and for the rest of his life, he's got to take medicine for the type of venereal disease he contacted.
How do people entertain themselves there?
Some guys from Jersey, some guys from Pennsylvania. They'd have like music, like the latest, like the Four Seasons, Frankie Valli, Motown. We'd get movies on board. Every time we went back to Subic, we had to wait our turn to get. We would get like 5 or 10 movies to go on a cruise. So we're out there. We could at least at night watch a movie on board, if we could. And one of the biggest hits those days was the first of the Clint Eastwood movies. And that was like a big treat, us to get to see a Clint Eastwood movie, that, you know, a cowboy western. That was a western type thing.
Were there entertainers there?
We Johnny Mathis came to Subic Bay, but we missed him. And Johnny Mathis put on a beautiful. We missed him. He was there for a week. Put on a week-long show, and the USO was very good. And the American Red Cross was in Hong Kong, and they were. They would bring us stuff. We'd go at a Red Cross place there. You have coffee, donuts, or whatever it was, and you know, just chat with somebody who wasn't Oriental, that wasn't a shipmate, you know.
Do you recall any particularly humorous or unusual events?
I'm trying to think. We had one day, I can't think of the town we're in, there was a farmer in a field, and you would buy, like you would do in a foreign country, buy some souvenirs, and he had a knife there and something else, and the guy wanted so much money. But right away, this Richard, who had been there in a riverboat, told me, whatever they ask you a price, you take that, you cut that down in half and less, and you offer to them, and if they're legit, they'll take it. Well, this guy wanted X amount of money for this. So I was with 2 guys, and we had on our work blues. Work with, when you load and unloaded, you have your jeans on and your boondockers and your blue hat and your blue shirt, and we had some time to kill. We had about 4 or 5 hours. So anyway, we're out there looking around, and I said to the guy, I says, what do you think? I says, I think it's worth this amount. You tell me this. So we're bartering back and forth. We weren't getting no place. So I said, what are you doing? He said, well, I'm turning this over. But you wouldn't know what that is, to turn dirt over in a field. You wouldn't know what that is. You people all have money trees in your backyard. It's okay, give me a shovel. I went down, I shoveled the whole end to the thing, which was maybe the distance from that building to this. I shoveled the whole path down for him so he could turn over and plant his, he was planting rice. And he looked at me. And the guy was sharp. And I said to him, I said, geez, I'd really like to get that particular handmade knife you got there, you know. He came down a little bit in the price. But he didn't come down to what my shipmate, who was on the riverboat, taught me. So I said, no. He said, you mean after all this, you're not going to give me that? No. Thank you. I'll see you. As I'm walking away now, I'm less than a short distance down. He comes running down to me. No, 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 no. I'll give it. I don't want it now. You keep it. It's not the money. We're not all that bad. See, they have an animosity towards you, and you don't see it as what we don't see. We're all the same. We try to be nice to one another. There's guys we don't get along with. There's girls we don't get along with, but we're all human. And these people, some of them, and this guy, then he wanted to give it to me. I didn't want it then. He followed me all the way back into town. And matter of fact, we had to go do something because it was so muddy. We had a 2.5-ton truck stuck in the mud, and there was an ensign there, and he was kind of confused, the Navy ensign. And he said to me, what do you think? I said, well, the first thing you should look for is another 2.5-ton truck. He said, what do you mean? I said, go out on the main drag, find another truck, get a chain, and we'll pull it out. Oh, he goes, they didn't teach you at Annapolis. But see, over there, the officers enlisted, you got along pretty good because you depend upon one another. And you didn't have this, like in boot camp, sometimes they get carried away with it. Too much spit and polish.
Did you ever keep a journal while you were active?
I didn't keep it up. I kept a small journal. It's funny you mention that. It's a weird thing. Bernice and I went to the first annual get-together the Coast Guard Cutter Hamilton crew had in 42 years. It was in Rockland, Maine. And before I left, I found this book I had. And the guy that was signing us in that day, I can't think of his name now, but I had it all written out. See, when a new bosun mate comes on board, they try to make themselves heard. They try to make a name for themselves, how bad they are. Well, anyway, I remember this guy, and during my little journal, I wrote down, and he didn't control me. He thought he did, because my control was gunner's mate. I was on the gunner's mate. And that day, he said, no, you're getting extra duty with these 10 other guys. He was a new chief. I can't remember his name, but I had it all written out. So I went there, and I went to sign in. He recognized me right away. I said, wait a minute. I said, I got something about you. Oh, Dave, what do you got? No, I didn't say Dave. Opotzner, what do you got? So I read this thing happened. He was trying to make a name for himself, and he just gave these extra guys duty just to prove with him. So for the next 3 days, we're there for 3 days, or 2 days, next 2 days, he kind of stayed. But anyway, I gave a donation towards the reunion of the Cutter Hamilton crew. But even though I was enlisted, I did keep, and I should have kept it more of a log, but I did keep a log. And that particular day I had that, because I kept it, every week you'd write 3 or 4 things that happened. And then I stopped doing it, whatever. But that was it. But I remember the day he first came on board, chief bosun mate, and he was trying to make a name for himself. And he didn't last the whole tour. See, a lot of guys didn't make it. They, psychologically, they're too far away from home. And a lot of guys had it shipped out early. I made my tour, and that, that was it.
Do you remember where you were when your service ended?
Yes, I was on a pier, base Boston, on the corner of Hanover Street, Commercial Street, the Coast Guard base in Boston. And they wanted me to sign for a med cruise. And my time was done. I was done. So I walked off, and they're all waving, throwing me the bird, everything. I'm going like this. I'll see you guys later. Carry my sea bag, and I'm out. It's almost like I'm out of here. I had it. One of the best days I ever had was when we came back to Boston. There wasn't too many welcome home stuff. And the day we came in, I was sitting down way in the back where the mess deck was, a small area where you could sit and have coffee. I'm having coffee. And I had my old coveralls on because, yeah, we're coming back into Boston. People be going home, and I didn't expect what I was going to see. So I'm sitting down with my jeans on, my jean hat, my jean shirt, having coffee. And somebody says, they get a phone call. So you got to get up to right up in the front where the gangplank, because we were tied up. Once we were tied up, we're all fine. You threw the gangplank down. They had a ceremony, which we're down there just having coffee, taking it easy, chilling out. And they called me up. And what it was, you got to get up here right away. My chief says, you got to get up here right away. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, yeah, all the admirals are going to walk on board and say, welcome home and all. What it was, my dad at that time, I forgot how old he was. He's a lot bigger guy than I was. And he'd walked up to the gangway, and I didn't catch the whole thing. I was told later by my shipmates. And they were getting ready. The first one was supposed to walk up was the admiral. And my dad walks over in front of all these brass and all the Coast Guard officers and all. And he says, who are you? He says, number one, he says, my son's on board. And number two, I'm a United States taxpayer. The first guy on board the Hamilton when we got back to Boston was my dad. I was totally embarrassed. I didn't know what he was going to do next. I was red in the face. I was sweating. I don't know what. So anyway, my chief says like this. He says, relax, take it easy. And he brought me over with him. He says, take your dad down, have coffee. And he was there, my two brothers, and they took me home that day, and they gave me like a 4-day break before I had to go back up. But,
what was your homecoming like? Like, what kind of reception did you get from civilians when you returned?
well, our particular family was good. They had a big sign, welcome home. And but other people, like, again, those days there was a lot more veterans around, and because you were in a Coast Guard, you weren't too well received. You go into a club or something like that or whatever. But anyway, it was pretty good. And except there was still a few more, and I didn't get involved. At Yale, they had a few more anti-war demonstrations because the war didn't end until 74, and I was home in actually 70, 71. And there was more anti-war. I just didn't go to them. I felt that we did what we had to do.
Did you work, or did you go to school after that?
I wanted to go to work for the Connecticut Light and Power. And next to the David S. Miles Legion post in Oxford on Route 67, used to be a big Connecticut Light and Power building. All my buddies were linemen. They used to go fishing and hunting together. And I went up there. And they also, at that time, the Connecticut Light and Power controlled the Stevenson Dam. I applied for a job. And the guy knew me. He said, Dave, I'd hire you tomorrow. But that's President Nixon's picture on the wall. He says, unless you're Spanish, and I know you're not black, he says, you can't get it. Everything was quotas. I went to the construction unions. I couldn't get work. I went to the Teamsters. I couldn't get work. So there was an older guy, Andy Kitchar, and I saw him one day. And he said, Dave, he says, what's going on? I said, I just don't want to lay around, and I don't really feel like going to school, and I don't want too much regimentation, but I want some work. So he says, did you work any place before you went in the Coast Guard? I said, yes, I worked for the Connecticut National Bank in Bridgeport on 888 Main Street. He says, how many hours of work were you working? I was working 40, 45 hours a week. I said, what do you mean, Andy? He said, well, there's a law. They've got to give you something. He said, what'd you do? I was a bonded messenger, and in the evening, I used to repossess cars for them. So he said, go down there. So I went down there. Here I am with brownish red hair, brownish red beard. I go into personnel, and the guy's practically laughing at me. And he said, what do you want? I said, well, I'd like to get a job. He said, what do you want? I said, I'll take anything. I want to go to work. And the guy, yeah, okay, I'll like somebody throws on the desk, I'll see you later, walk out. 2 weeks later, my mother gets home, and some guy's been calling me. So what it was he wanted to have a meeting with me. He went down there, he says, well, we're going to teach you to be, of all things, a bank teller. So I went to work, I worked in a bank on the Post Road in Orange, Connecticut. And that time, Connecticut was a manufacturing hub. And there was 21 trucking companies between West Haven and the Milford Post Shopping Center. And as I was working in a bank, I would work one night a week for Interstate Motor Freight, and I would load trucks. And I did that for about a year or so, and I was a teller, but at least I got work. And but the bank teller was okay, but there was no, and I didn't want to stay around that long, but I wanted something more physical, though, and that was about it.
Do you make any close friendships in the service that you continued after you were discharged? Yes.
Yeah. And we were friendly up in Rockland, Maine. There's a Coast Guard base up there, small one. And when I went in the parking lot with Bernice, I was walking across the parking lot, and there was 6 or 8 couples. And these guys were yelling my name. I didn't recognize them because you all change. But as it got closer, and I started seeing the physical movements, and a few times you knew somebody by their movements. You're with them so long, and their facial expressions. I started to know who they were, but I apologized. I said, I must be getting senile. He said, well, you didn't change. I said, yeah, it's changed. Changed a lot. But, and a lot of them were renewed friendships. And we lost a good shipmate, Alan Hassig from Litchfield. He died. Last time I saw him was at the Rockland, Maine thing. and he was in a wheelchair, and he had developed a debilitating disease. I can't remember what it is right now. It might have been muscular sclerosis or something like that. But Alan was a heck of a nice guy, and I didn't recognize him in the chair. And two guys grabbed me. He says, "You got to go." Alan asked for you. We're at the Trade Winds Hotel in Rockland. And then I knew it was him and went over and he gave me a hug. I gave him a hug. And he was from Litchfield. He died, Alan Hassig died about 2 months after our reunion. A 6-month period he passed. But we lost 30 guys out of our group.
How did your time in the military affect your thinking about war?
I never thought too much about war. I don't like war. I didn't like war. But the thing is, you can't be a pacifist and expect that some higher power is going to do the right thing, because there's not always a higher power. Sometimes because you have the ammunition and the weaponry, you are the higher power for a short time. But in World War I, after World War I ended, there was a Geneva Convention. It said you only had to give your name, rank, and serial number. You won't be savagely or tortured. And now our country and the world, especially Europe, hasn't advanced that in Syria, where there was chemical warfare. When I was in a David S. Miles American Legion post in Oxford, there was a gentleman who was 90 years old at that time, and all day long he'd go, his name was Harvey Olderman, and Harvey Olderman had been hit with mustard gas in World War I. And every day, if he didn't walk 4 or 5 miles, he would die. He was also the drum major for the Connecticut Hurricanes, Drum and Bugle Corps from Shelton, Connecticut. And at the national competition, they allowed him to stand in place and do his marked time rather than go around the field next to the American flag. And when you see somebody, and I saw him a lot of different times at functions, and when you see somebody all day long go, he tries to hide it with a thing on his mouth. Mustard gas is something, and I very strongly feel that, again, you can't hope somebody else is going to enforce it, but no one should have. It was outlawed by the Geneva Convention, and this is something when we're overseas, they told us, anything happens to you guys, we're going to come get you. But all you're supposed to give is your name, rank, and serial number. They could starve you, they could cut you up, or whatever they want to do. But
and you said you joined a veteran organization.
I belong to the American Legion, the VFW. I'm the commander of the DAV. I also used to belong to Catholic War Vets, but you can't belong to all of them. But I try to help with the younger group, Iraq and Afghanistan. And lately, they're not coming to get involved in helping out. We do 25, 30 functions a year. And how I got to it was all the older guys are passing on. And Bernice goes to all these events with me. And we try to pass out information to guys who've been there, who had addiction problems and stuff like that. And these are some of the organizations that I belong to. And what it is you try to teach younger people. But again, getting back to being, no country wants to go to war.
Sure. How did your service and your experiences affect your life after the war?
My daughter calls me a dinosaur. That's about it.
Is there anything you would like to add that has not been covered?
I think you guys scratched all the surfaces. You guys did a fantastic job.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you for your service and also for your time with the interview.
Thank you.